two phases of the nationwide lockdown, many experts warned a minor contraction in India's economic growth. But with the lockdown being extended to the end of May and expectation of delays in getting the supply chains operational following the return of millions of migrant workers to their home states, degrowth will be deeper and recovery will be shallower and more delayed. This is the forecast of most economists around the world today. Several multinational organizations have now forecasted that India's GDP will fall by 45%, which will lead to the worst recession. Moody's, Nomura, India Ratings and a United States-based multinational investment bank named Goldman Sachs have predicted this recession. Goldman Sachs report has forecasted that India will experience its deepest recession so far with a GDP decline of 45% expected in the second quarter, with an estimate of real GDP falling by 5% in the financial year 2021 running till next March. The economic contraction is far more than expected previously. The -5% growth forecasted for financial year 2021 by the American Bank would be deeper compared to all recessions India has ever experienced. Goldman Sachs had earlier projected the country's GDP to contract 20% in the second quarter and 0.4% for the financial year 2021. Restarting India's economy has many challenges, especially in containment red zones, which account for about 45% of GDP. Supply chains are improving, but they are still operating at low levels along with missing logistics and weak end demand. The Indian economy is to rebound 20% in the third quarter compared to the current quarter. Then 14% growth is expected in the fourth quarter and 6.5% growth in the first quarter of 2021. Overall, Goldman's forecasts suggest India's GDP will slump 5% this fiscal year, which would be its steepest contraction since 1979. American business and financial services company named Moody also says in a report that India may see 0% GDP growth this fiscal year. If nominal GDP growth does not return to high rates, the government will face very significant constraints in narrowing the budget deficit and preventing a rise in debt burden. Another international brokerage firm named Nomura has told that India's GDP for financial year 2021 will be from -0.4% to -5.2%. The Indian government has extended its nationwide lockdown until May 31st, while further easing restrictions in certain sectors to boost economic activity as coronavirus cases escalate across the country. Recently, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman gave details of the country's $265 billion virus rescue package, that is, the 20 lakh crore relief package. There is an episode about that in detail, so please do watch that too. So, this 20 lakh crore relief package, which was announced recently, is equivalent to 10% of India's GDP. There have been a series of structural reform announcements across several sectors over the past few days, and these reforms are more medium term in nature, and so we cannot expect these to have an immediate impact on reviving growth. Having said that, the next important question that comes to our mind is, can India survive this recession? We saw just now that in a bid to revive the economy, the central government announced easing restrictions in certain sectors to boost economic activity while extending the nationwide lockdown until the end of this month. Many economists are quite confident that the country is reasonably better prepared than during the previous global financial crisis of 2008. The government has kept ready aggressive remedial financial aid to help to sustain the economy. We also saw that the recently announced 20 lakh crore rupees economic package by the Indian government is claimed to be 10% of India's GDP. However, some analysts have pointed out that a significant portion of the relief package includes measures which have been previously announced. The RBI has also issued economic guidelines adhering to the new situation. The ground reality is that impact on industries and employees have been profound. Salary slashes have been forced upon the employees in order to minimize the losses. Similarly, thousands have been given leave with loss of pay until the pandemic passes. While the industries did start operating in certain areas, catering to the guidelines laid down by the government, they are operating at a considerably lesser workforce. The challenge is also to stimulate demand. Even though supply chains have eased up because of different regions being categorized in different zones, companies are facing many problems to plan logistics and continue operations. The country's exports and imports also reported a contraction of 60% year over year in April. Even for the month of March, where the lockdown was only for a week, the industrial production contracted by 16.7% and exports fell by 34.6%. Everybody in the current crisis will go down. The IMF estimate of 1.9% at a particular point in March was the fastest of any major economy in the world. In other words, the IMF has given its own certificate that even when things are very bad for the globe as a whole, India will be one of the best performers and emerge well out of the current crisis. The only sectors where we do not see any negative points for the year as a whole is agriculture, public administration, and to a small extent finance and business services. In the downside risk scenario, where the pandemic outbreaks gets prolonged, restricting full restoration of economic activity for an extended period, the GDP growth for the financial year 2021 could contract by as much as minus 0.9% as we saw earlier. If the starting point at the end of June quarter is minus 10 to 15% year over year and the speed of the recovery is around 4 to 5%, then we should end the year with near zero growth. However, in our base case, we assume that the recovery from June will be restrained by supply even if there is some demand. This is why economists think 2020 will be the first negative print in 40 years. Given the base effect, the growth rate in financial year 2021 would bounce back with a growth rate of close to 10% in 2021. Gradual normalization of supply chains and some pent-up demand will be the main driver of growth in the coming quarters of 2020. The Great Lockdown is expected to pull global growth down by 3% in 2020, which is worse than minus 0.073% in 2009. While the IMF predicts India to escape negative growth this year, we will see negative growth because of the extended nationwide lockdown. To add more salt to the wound, foreign investors have pulled an estimated $26 billion out of developing Asian economies and more than $16 billion out of India, thus increasing the concerns of a major economic recession in Asia. This is a report by independent research organization from the US. In Europe, over 30 million people in countries such as Germany, France and the UK have applied for state support because of unemployment. Data for the first quarter of 2020 indicates that the Eurozone economy contracted by 3.8%. The report said this is the largest quarterly decline since 1995. The preliminary data for the United States indicated that the gross domestic product growth, that is the GDP growth of the country, fell by 4.8% in the first quarter of this year. This is the largest quarterly decline since the fourth quarter of 2008 during the global financial crisis. Over the 5-week period from mid-March to late April, more than 30 million Americans filed for unemployment insurance. While almost all major economies are shrinking as a result of the coronavirus, the report said that only 3 countries, that is China, India and Indonesia, are projected to experience small but positive rates of economic growth in 2020. India is a consumer-driven economy of about 60%, unlike some other countries such as China, where the economy is more investment-driven. As a percentage of the GDP, we are only spending 1.2% to 1.3%. 60% of the economy needs help, and that is where the money is not going to come from. The country's fiscal deficit numbers have also emerged as a potential cause to worry amid the crisis, even as economists continue to stress that India as a nation is better prepared to bear the coming strain. All positive bearings aside, only time will tell how well we truly cope with the pandemic. Until that time, all we can hope is some considerate measures be taken from the government and industries. Working collectively for the greater goal will then see us truly emerge well off from this recession. If you remember the 2008-2009 recession, do comment about it. Tell us your experience about the previous recession and which part or element of the previous recession do you think will be repeated this time too. Thank you for the support. This is Nisha PS.